Welcome to Houston Newsmakers and to Harris County Judge Emmett. Good morning.
Good morning.
To see you, Judge. Always good to see you, especially after you've had a week like you had last week. Commissioners Court voted, said, okay, this is officially the next step of the Astrodome life is okay, ready to go. Your thoughts about that process?
Well, thank goodness we're finally moving forward. This is the plan that was really adopted last year. Last week's vote was merely the funding piece of it. We needed to be sure the engineering worked, and the engineers came back and said, yes, indeed, you can do this. So what it does is it builds a new floor, creates 9 acres of open space that can be used for all sorts of events and gatherings, the rodeo, OTC, and by the way, by building a new floor, it gives us space underneath to put 1,400 prime parking spaces out there.
I noticed a lot of people were happy about that, but there are a lot of people who are all continue to be confused about it in some ways because we had a bond vote and we voted that down. What's the difference between that and now? I mean, I know it, but would you explain that?
Well, in this case, the voters said we don't want you to borrow $217 million in a bond. That was what was voted down. So Commissioners Court listened and said, okay, you don't want that big project, but we need to turn the dome into a revenue-generating facility to benefit the livestock show and rodeo, the Texans. We've got to keep NRG Stadium updated. So this is that project. And because we're not asking for a bond, we're not asking to borrow money, we're not raising taxes to do it, there's no requirement to go to the voters. In fact, such a thing has never gone to the voters in the state of Texas.
Well, now I understand that the construction is going to begin sometime in the fall. How long will this process take, and what's going to be done? Is it anything to the exterior, or is it all interior kinds of stuff?
Well, we also have to, well, let me answer the first question. About October is when we think construction can begin. It'll be a 17 to 24-month project. So sometime in 2020, the dome should be available to be used. We have to remember it's protected by the Texas Historical Commission. We have to go to the Texas Historical Commission to get permission for anything, including this project. So now that we've formally adopted it, that'll be the first step. And I don't think there'll be a problem with this because we're not changing. So the exterior will not change, is my best guess.
Who's ultimately responsible for whatever design happens inside the dome?
Well, ultimately, it's still the county.
Okay.
But like I said, we have to get the approval. Like how many seats can we take out? What do we do to the risers where the seats were on? All those have to be submitted to the Texas Historical Commission. But I have to remind people, this just creates this 9 acres of covered space, which in Houston, Texas, any season of the year is prime. It's something that's needed. And it even came up during Harvey, the military assets that are staged out there.
Right.
If we could have used those 9 acres and moved those guys under cover, would have been very helpful.
You've got detractors no matter what,
Sure.
because even though it's not a bond, there's still some tax money that's being used. It's tax money that's a part of your daily operations or what have you. But, you know, State Senator Betancourt and Lieutenant Governor Patrick have been very vocal about saying, well, look, you get tax money being spent. It's too much. You shouldn't have to do it without voters having a say.
Well, that's why voters don't vote on capital improvement projects unless there's a bond. That's never happened in the state of Texas. Voters didn't vote on the 1910 courthouse renovation. Voters aren't voting on what we're going to do to the criminal courthouse that got damaged during Harvey.
And you're thinking that as long as you show that some point down the road that this is going to be a revenue-generating kind of process, that all of this will go away at some point?
Oh, I think it will. And you know, we've all taken polls, and I understand that most people want something done with the dome.
Right.
We can't just leave it sitting there. And so I've challenged some of those names you've mentioned and said, well, what do you want to do with it? Well, you just need to go to the voters. Well, but what do you want to do with it? And they can't answer that because they've never had to make a real decision in terms of what to do with some facility like the Astrodome.
Yeah, and that's just kind of like a tip of the iceberg about some other things that have been going on between the county and the state as well, about decisions being made there. I sense that there's no kumbaya moments happening as far as that's concerned.
Not yet, but I hope we get over that because local elected officials are elected to do a job, and we're doing our job, and we had to use that dome to maintain the rest of NRG Park. It's a revenue source. We can't use property tax to do that. That would really set some of those people off. And so we've got to find a revenue generator. And the dome, if you've read, auto show, boat show, OTC, livestock show and rodeo. Everybody wants to use it. And then the emergency facility aspect is a new one too, that we can certainly use those 9 acres.
Well, let's hope we don't have to use them anytime real soon, but it is a reality in Houston, Texas. We have tropical situations. Hurricane Harvey is in our rearview mirror now. How do you explain to people that there are no monies that are being used for the dome that would otherwise go to help with recovery efforts?
You know, the county has a budget, and this project started last year. As a matter of fact, I brought this brochure that I brought sometime last year.
Right.
This is not a new thing. It just happened to fall at this timing.
This whole process now, Governor Abbott was in town this week to talk about FEMA money available. How's that going to be used within the county at this point, and how soon will it be used?
Well, I hope really soon. We've got to get people back in their homes. We've got to be able to tell people who's going to be bought out. You don't want to renovate your home and then have us, Harris County Flood Control, come along and say, okay, now we're going to buy out your property. We've got to do the buyouts. We've got to complete the projects like Braze and White Oak. And then we've got to talk about the 3rd reservoir. And we've got to figure out the other aspects, the San Jacinto River, you know, that whole Kingwood area. We have a lot to address. That will be addressed in a bond issue. That will go to the voters.
And you talked about that once before as a thought process about ideas about going forward. We're going to talk more about that. We always love having you here because we do have a lot to talk about. We're going to continue to talk about this on Houston Newsmakers Extra. Click2Houston.com. That means that you go to click2Houston.com right now. We'll pick up the conversation from right where we're leaving off. Coming up, surprising role played by Native Americans as slave owners of African Americans.